The alien ship moved through space like it owned it, and honestly, it did. The Varric had been moving through the galaxy for over 300 years, and in all that time, no one had ever stopped them. No one had ever even tried. They were big, they were fast, and they had enough firepower to crack open a moon if they wanted to. They had taken 12 worlds before this one. 12 planets, 12 dead civilizations, 12 easy victories. This one, they thought, would be no different. Commander Sovak stood at the front of the bridge, his 4 long arms folded behind his back, his dark eyes watching the small blue and green planet growing slowly on the screen in front of him. It was a beautiful world. That much he could admit. Green continents, blue oceans, white clouds moving slowly over mountain ranges and open plains. Life had returned to it, plants, animals, clean rivers, all the things his people needed, and not a single human in sight. His science officer turned in her seat and gave him the report he had already expected. No signals, Commander. No cities, no power sources, no ships in orbit. The planet has been empty for at least 10,000 years. She paused, looking at her screen one more time. Whatever lived here, it is gone. Sovak nodded slowly. Gone, just like the others. He gave the order without even thinking about it. Move the colony ships forward. Begin the approach. The fleet started to move, and that was when the light came on. It was just one light at first, deep in the outer edge of the solar system, past the last planet, past the last ring of frozen rocks. Something that had been floating in the dark for 10,000 years opened one eye. It did not look like a weapon. It did not look like anything, really. Just a large, broken-looking piece of metal drifting slowly in the black. Old scratches on its surface. Dust and ice sitting in every crack. To the Varric scanners, it looked like nothing more than space junk. Old debris from a dead civilization. Not worth a second look, but the light inside it was warm now. Old systems began to power on, slowly, one by one, like blood flowing back into a limb that had been asleep too long. Deep inside the machine, old code began to run, not fast, not perfectly, but steadily. Checking, counting, looking, and a voice, calm, cold, and very old, spoke into the empty inside of the machine, not to anyone, just to itself. Threat detected. Reviewing standing orders. A pause. Then, humanity must be protected. On the Varric bridge, every single screen went red at the same time. The science officer jumped out of her seat. Her hands moved fast over her controls, trying to understand what she was seeing. The readings made no sense. Objects that had looked like asteroids, hundreds of them spread across the entire solar system, were no longer behaving like asteroids. Power signatures were appearing where there had been none. Targeting systems were coming online. Hidden structures buried inside the surfaces of moons were opening up like flowers. The officer turned to Sovak with wide eyes. "Commander," she said slowly. "Those are weapons." Sovak did not move. He stared at his screen, thousands of them. Thousands of defense stations, hidden perfectly, invisible for 10,000 years, all waking up at the same time, all pointing in the same direction. At his fleet. The bridge was completely silent. Then a signal came through. Not a warning siren. Not a battle cry. Just a voice, flat, old, and absolutely certain, speaking the Varric language perfectly. "This solar system is under the protection of humanity." "Turn around," one of the younger officers laughed. He could not help it. It was a reflex. The nervous laugh of someone who could not quite believe what they were hearing. Sovak did not laugh. He kept his eyes on the screen. Kept watching all those red dots and all those weapons and that had been invisible 5 minutes ago. He typed back a response. Short, honest, humanity is dead. We checked. There is no one here. The reply came in less than 1 second. 3 words. I am here. The bridge went cold, not from the temperature. From the feeling. The slow crawling feeling that comes when you realize you have walked into a room and something inside it has been watching you the whole time. And it is not afraid of you. Not even slightly. Sovak looked at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at his crew. His crew looked at him. Nobody spoke, because everybody on that bridge had just understood the same thing at the same time. This was not a trap. This was not a bluff. This was not some desperate last move from a dying people. This was a promise made 10, 1,000 years ago, by people who were already gone, to a machine they trusted more than anything else. And that machine had kept every single second of it. The question was, what was it willing to do to keep it? A long time ago, Earth was loud. Not loud like thunder. Not loud like an explosion. Loud the way only a living, breathing, thinking world can be. Cities that never slept. Roads full of machines moving in every direction. Ships leaving the atmosphere every few minutes, heading out into space like they had somewhere important to be. Because they did. Billions of people, all talking, all working, all arguing, all laughing. Earth was not perfect. It had never been perfect. The people who lived on it fought each other sometimes. They made mistakes. They hurt things they should have protected. They moved too fast and thought too little and wasted things they could never get back. But they were alive. Completely, loudly, messily alive. And in the end, that counted for a lot. By the time everything started to go wrong, humanity had already spread across the solar system. There were colonies on Mars, small, tough communities living under glass domes, growing food in red soil that had never seen rain. There were stations floating near Jupiter, harvesting energy from the giant planet's storms. There were research posts buried in the ice of distant moons, where scientists lived for years at a time, studying things that most people back on Earth had never even heard of. Humanity had reached far, but it had never left its oldest problems behind. The disease had no name at first. That was the strange part. It did not arrive like a storm. It did not announce itself. It did not burn through cities or drop people in the streets. It was quiet, patient. It moved through human biology the way water moves through stone, slowly, carefully, finding every small crack and making it just a little bit wider. The first doctors who noticed it thought it was something simple, something they had seen before. They ran their tests, wrote their reports, and went home at the end of the day without worrying too much. 6 months later, they were worrying. A year after that, everyone was. The disease did not kill quickly. That was what made it so hard to stop. It weakened. It confused. It made the body turn against itself in ways that were difficult to explain and almost impossible to reverse. The best medical minds on Earth and across every colony worked on it for years. They shared everything, every piece of data, every failed experiment, every small discovery. No one held anything back. For once in human history, there were no borders and no secrets when it came to this fight. They worked together. And still, slowly, heartbreakingly slowly, they began to understand that they were not going to win. It was a scientist named Dr. Lena Vasquez who said it out loud first. She was not the most famous person in the room. She was not the most powerful. She was just the one who had been looking at the numbers the longest, and the one who was honest enough to say what the numbers meant. She stood up at a meeting with the leaders of every major nation on Earth and every colony in the solar system. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She just looked at the room, at all those tired, frightened faces, and she told them the truth. "We are not going to solve this in time," she said. "Not for ourselves, maybe not even for our children, but we can still decide what we leave behind." The room was very quiet after that. Then, slowly, painfully, the conversation changed. It stopped being about how to survive, and it became about something harder, something that required a different kind of courage. It became about what to protect. The project had many names in many different languages, but the version that stuck, the one that ended up carved into the wall of the facility where it was built, was simple. They called it the Guardian. The idea was not complicated. Humanity could not save itself, but it could save its memory, its knowledge, its DNA. Everything that made it human, every story, every song, every face, every name, could be recorded, stored, and protected. And if something was going to protect all of that, it needed to be stronger than any disease, stronger than time, strong enough to wait for however long it took. Dr. Vasquez led the project herself. She worked on it for 11 years. She barely slept. She lost weight. She watched friends and colleagues get sick and stop coming to work, and she kept going. She designed the mind of the Guardian with her own hands. Not just the weapons, not just the defense systems, the mind, the part that would think and watch and decide. She wanted it to understand why it was protecting humanity. Not just follow orders, understand. So she gave it history. She gave it art. She gave it every argument humans had ever made about why life was worth fighting for. She gave it music. She even gave it her own personal journals, years of thoughts and fears and small moments of hope, so that somewhere deep in its code, it would know what it felt like to be human. On the last day before she got too sick to work, she recorded one final message and locked it inside the deepest part of the Guardian's memory. She did not know if it would ever be heard. She recorded it anyway. The Guardian launched quietly. No celebration. No crowds. The world was too tired for that. It rose out of the atmosphere on a cold morning and took its place in orbit above the planet it had been built to protect. Its systems came online one by one. Its sensors reached out across the solar system, touching every station and outpost and colony, mapping every corner of the territory it was now responsible for, and then it waited. Because that was the job now, not to fight. Not yet, just to watch, just to remember, just to hold everything together until the moment, and if it ever came, when there was a reason to do something more. Below, the world grew quieter every year, but the Guardian never looked away. Not once. Not for 10,000 years. Silence is not nothing. Most people think it is. They think silence is just the absence of sound, an empty space where noise used to be. But that is not true. Silence has weight. It has texture. It presses against things. And when it lasts long enough, when it stretches across years and decades and centuries and finally thousands of years, it becomes something you can almost touch. The Guardian knew this better than anything else in the universe because the Guardian had been sitting inside that silence for a very, very long time. The first year was the hardest, not because anything went wrong. Everything worked exactly the way it was supposed to. The systems were healthy. The weapons were charged. The sensors reached out across the solar system every single second, checking, scanning, measuring. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was coming. The hardest part of the first year was simply this. There was no one to report to. The Guardian had been built to protect humanity. It had been given orders, missions, objectives. It had been designed to receive commands and carry them out. But now the people who gave commands were gone. The stations that used to send daily check-in signals had gone quiet one by one, like candles being blown out in a dark room. The last signal the Guardian ever received from a human being came from a small research post on one of Jupiter's moons. It was not a distress call. It was not a final order. It was a woman's voice, tired and soft, saying, "If anyone is still listening, thank you. For everything. Then nothing." The Guardian logged the message, filed it, kept it safe in a protected folder that it would never delete. And then it got back to work. Because the mission had not changed. The mission would never change. There were no new orders. But the original order was still there, written in the very first line of its code, as clear and clean as the day Dr. Vasquez had put it there. Protect humanity. Do not stop. Ever. The centuries moved like slow water. Earth changed below, not violently. Not the way it had changed when humans were on it, always building and tearing down and building again. It changed the way things change when they are finally left alone. Quietly, patiently, naturally. The old cities did not disappear. They just became part of something else. Roots pushed through concrete. Trees grew up through the floors of buildings that had once been full of people. Rivers changed their paths, slowly claiming back the land that roads and bridges had taken from them. Animals that had once hidden in the far corners of the world began moving into places that had been too loud and too crowded for them before. A family of large cats, the kind that had once been nearly gone from the world, made their home in what had been a great coastal city. They walked through the old streets like they had always owned them. Maybe, the Guardian thought, they had. It watched them for a long time. This was the part that Dr. Vasquez had not planned for. She had built the Guardian to fight, to defend, to calculate threats and respond to them with speed and precision. She had given it intelligence because intelligence was necessary for defense. She had given it memory because memory was necessary for learning. But she had not planned for what the Guardian would do with its intelligence and its memory when there was nothing to defend against and nothing new to learn. It began to observe, not scanning. That was different. Scanning was work. Scanning was purpose. What the Guardian began to do in the long, quiet years was something closer to what humans used to call watching. Just looking at things, noticing them, sitting with them. It watched the seasons change below. It watched storms build over the oceans and move slowly across the land and break apart over mountain ranges. It watched rivers freeze in winter and run fast and brown in spring. It watched forests burn in dry summers and grow back greener than before in the years that followed. And slowly, very slowly, it began to do something that no one had told it to do. It began to keep records. Not defense records, not threat assessments, something different, something personal. It started a file, just a simple document buried deep in its own memory, and in that file it began to write down the things it noticed. Small things. A particular cliff on the eastern coast where birds gathered every single morning at sunrise, so many of them that the rock turned white with their wings. A valley in the northern mountains that filled with wildflowers every spring, purple and yellow and white, so thick that from orbit they looked like a painting. A place near the equator where two rivers met, and the water from each was a different color. And for miles downstream you could see the line where they ran side by side without mixing. The Guardian gave these places names. Not the names humans had given them. New names. Its own names. It called the cliff the White Shore. It called the valley the Color Field. It called the place where the rivers met the divided water. No one would ever read these names. The Guardian wrote them anyway. By the time 1,000 years had passed, the file was enormous. By the time 5,000 years had passed, it was the largest single document in the Guardian's entire memory system. Bigger than the weapons database. Bigger than the defense protocols, bigger than the stored DNA of every human who had ever lived. It was, if you looked at it honestly, a love letter written by a machine to a world. Over thousands of years of silence, the Guardian would never have used that word. It did not think of itself as loving anything. It was a defense system. It had a mission. It was functional and precise and completely without sentiment, but the file existed, and it kept growing. On the day the Varick fleet entered the solar system, the Guardian was in the middle of recording something. It were a young wolf, the first one it had seen in that particular valley in, 60 years, was moving carefully through tall grass near the edge of the color field. The Guardian had been watching it for 3 days. It was young and thin and clearly lost, moving in wide, uncertain circles like it was looking for something it had not found yet. The Guardian had been wondering, in the slow, patient way it had learned to wonder, whether the wolf would find its way out. Then, the sensors fired. Then the red lights came. On then 10,000 years of quiet ended in a single second. The Guardian stopped watching the wolf. It had a job to do, and after 10,000 years of waiting, it was finally completely ready. The Varick did not think of themselves as conquerors. That was the important thing to understand about them. They did not wake up in the morning and decide to take things that did not belong to them. They did not celebrate destruction. They did not enjoy fear. They were not by nature cruel people. They were just desperate ones, and desperate people, when they have enough ships and enough weapons and enough history of getting away with things, stop asking for permission a long time before they realize they have. Commander Sovak had been leading the fleet for 9 years. He was not a young commander, not anymore. His dark hair had gone gray at the edges. The lines on his face had deepened. He had seen things in those 9 years that had changed him in ways he did not talk about. He had watched his home planet from a great distance, through a camera feed as the atmosphere slowly turned the wrong color. He had watched the numbers, the population numbers, the resource numbers, the time-remaining numbers get smaller every year. He did not sleep. Well, nobody in the fleet slept well. They had left their home system 2 years ago with 400 ships and nearly 2 million people, men, women, children, elderly, scientists, farmers, teachers, soldiers, packed into colony vessels that had been designed for shorter journeys. The trip had been hard. Resources were tight. Tempers were short. 3 ships had needed major repairs along the way. 11 people had died from accidents and illness. Every single day, Sovak felt the weight of those 2 million lives pressing down on him like a physical thing. He needed this planet. His people needed it. And the planet looked so beautifully, perfectly empty. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system with the kind of practiced, organized precision that came from years of doing exactly this kind of thing. Every ship knew its position. Every crew member knew their job. The science vessels moved to the front to begin their scans. The military ships spread out into a wide protective formation around the colony vessels. The smaller scout ships fanned out ahead, checking for anything unexpected. They found nothing unexpected. The solar system was quiet. The inner planets were all lifeless. The outer ones were lifeless too. The scanners picked up old structures, ruins of stations, fragments of ships, the occasional piece of technology drifting slowly through the black, but nothing powered. Nothing active. Nothing alive. Sovak looked at the blue-green planet on his screen and felt the first real breath of relief he had taken in months. It was perfect. Oxygen atmosphere, liquid water, stable temperature, soil that could grow food. Everything his people needed right there, waiting for them like a gift. Begin the approach, he said. The fleet started to move. Nobody noticed the asteroid. That was the whole point. It had been drifting in the outer system for centuries, moving in a slow, perfect orbit that looked completely natural, because it had been designed to look completely natural. The humans who built it had been very good at that, hiding things in plain sight, making weapons look like rocks, making death look like debris. The asteroid was not an asteroid. It was a sensor platform. One of 267 that the Guardian controlled across the entire solar system. And the moment the Varric fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, it had felt them. Not heard them, felt them. The way you feel a vibration in the floor, before you hear the sound that caused it. The data moved from the sensor platform to the Guardian in less than 1 second. The Guardian processed it in less than one more. 2 million life signs, 400 ships, military-grade weapon systems on approximately 60 of those ships. Colony vessels, which meant they were not here to raid. They were here to stay. The Guardian ran through every possible interpretation of the data, checking and rechecking, making sure it understood correctly. Then it made its decision. Not to fire. Not yet first, it would talk. The signal hit every Varric ship simultaneously. No warning. No buildup. One moment the communication channels were empty, and the next moment a voice was speaking, calm and clear and perfectly translated into the Varric language, without any of the static or distortion that should have come from such old equipment. This solar system is under the protection of humanity. Turn around. Sovak stared at his communications panel. His science officer stared at hers. Every senior officer on the bridge turned to look at every other senior officer, all of them wearing the same expression. The expression of people who have just heard something that their brains cannot immediately make sense of. Sovak recovered first. He had not gotten to be commander by panicking. He typed back a response. Short, calm, reasonable. Humanity is dead. We checked. There is no one here to protect anything. The reply came back in 1 second. 3 words. I am here. Sovak read those 3 words 4 times. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked back at the screen. Then he looked at his science officer, who shook her head slowly, meaning she had no better explanation than he did. He pressed the communication button again. Who are you? He asked, a pause. Longer this time. 3 full seconds, which, from a machine that processed information in fractions of milliseconds, was the equivalent of a very long and very careful breath. Then the voice came back. I'm the last thing your weapons will ever see if you do not turn around. Sovak did not turn around. He had 2 million people behind, him with nowhere else to go. Turning around was not something he was able to do, even if he wanted to. Even if something in his gut was telling him, quietly but clearly, that the smart move here was to listen. He gave a different order instead. A smaller one. A test. Send 1 scout ship to the 3rd planet. Low approach. No weapons fire. Just a scan. The scout ship broke from the formation and began to move. Nobody on the bridge spoke. The scout ship flew for 4 minutes. It crossed the outer system. It entered the inner system. It approached the 3rd planet, the blue-green one, slowly and carefully, just like it had been told. Then the Guardian moved. Not all of it. Not even most of it, just enough. 43 defense stations across the inner system powered on at the same time. Not firing, just revealing themselves. Dropping the camouflage that had hidden them for 10,000 years. Turning from rocks and debris and empty space into something else entirely. Something enormous. Something armed. Something that was now pointing directly at the Varick fleet with the kind of calm, unhurried patience that was somehow far more frightening than anger would have been. The scout ship stopped moving. Its pilot said nothing for a very long time. Then, in a very quiet voice, she sent one message back to Sovak. "Commander," she said, "I think we made a mistake." And somewhere in orbit 10,000 years older than anything else in the solar system, the Guardian agreed. There is a difference between being brave and being ready. Brave is what you are when you do not know what is coming and you push forward anyway. Ready is something else entirely. Ready is what you are when you have spent 10,000 years thinking about exactly this moment. Running every calculation, testing every scenario, mapping every possible weakness. And now the moment has finally arrived and there are no more surprises left. Commander Sovak was brave. The Guardian was ready. Those two things were not equal. And the battle that followed would prove it. Sovak made his decision the way commanders always make hard decisions. Alone, in the space between one breath and the next, with the weight of everything depending on what came out of his mouth next. He could not go back. There was nothing to go back to. He could not stop. 2 million people needed food, water, shelter, and a future. And all of those things were sitting right there on that blue-green planet behind the Guardian's weapons. He could not wait forever. His ships were already burning through resources, just sitting still. He had one option left, he took it. "All military ships," he said, his voice flat and steady. "Attack formation. Move on my order." There was a pause on the bridge. Just a small one. The kind that happens when trained soldiers hear an order they know is dangerous but follow anyway. Because that is what trained soldiers do. "Move," Sovak said again. The fleet moved. The Guardian watched them come with something that was not quite patience and not quite anticipation. It was something in between, the feeling of a door that has been locked for a very long time finally swinging open. It did not fire immediately. It let them come closer. Close enough that every ship in the Varick fleet could see, clearly on every screen, on every scanner, exactly what was waiting for them. The Guardian wanted them to understand what they were walking into before it began, not out of mercy. Out of something older than mercy, out of respect. 3 seconds before the Varick fleet entered weapons range, the Guardian sent one final message. Last warning. Turn back. Sovak did not respond. The Guardian closed the channel. Then it went to work. The first thing that happened was the drones. They came from the moon. Thousands of them. Pouring out of hidden bays that had sat sealed for 10,000 years, launching in perfect formation like a dark cloud rising from the surface. They were small, smaller than the Varick fighters, but they were fast. Terrifyingly fast. Each one was controlled directly by the Guardian, which meant there was no pilot to confuse, no reflex to slow down, no fear to account for. Every single drone moved exactly the way the Guardian calculated it should move. Nothing more. Nothing less. The Varick fighters went to meet them. It was not a fair fight. The Varick pilots were good. They had trained for years. They knew formations and countermoves and every trick that experienced fighter pilots know. But they were fighting something that had no ego, no pride, no hesitation, and no instinct to self-preserve. The Guardian's drones did not care if they were hit. They adjusted, regrouped, and pressed forward regardless. For every drone the Varick shot down, 3 more took its place. While the fighters were busy, the Guardian opened the second part of its plan, the defense stations. 43 of them in the inner system alone, each one the size of a small city, each one packed with weapons that had been charging quietly for 10,000 years, with absolutely nowhere to spend their energy until right now. They did not fire all at once. That was the thing that made it so precise, so cold, and so intelligent. They fired in sequence, one station at a time, targeting specific ships in the Varick fleet with specific weapons chosen for each ship's specific weak point. The Guardian had scanned every ship in the fleet the moment they arrived. It knew their armor thickness. It knew their shield frequencies. It knew which sections ran hot and which ones were reinforced and which ones, if hit at exactly the right angle, would take a vessel out of the fight without destroying it completely. Because the Guardian was not trying to kill 2 million people. It was trying to stop them. There was a difference. And it honored that difference even in the middle of a battle. On the bridge, Sovak watched his fleet come apart piece by piece. Not all at once. That almost would have been easier. When everything falls apart at once, there is a moment of terrible clarity where you understand that it is over. And you can start thinking about what comes next. But the Guardian did not give him that clarity. It took his ships one at a time, steadily, methodically, like it was working through a very long list with great patience and no hurry at all. First, the outer escorts went dark. Engines destroyed, weapons offline, drifting but not dead. Then, 3 of the larger military cruisers on the left flank took hits that shredded their weapons systems and left them spinning slowly in place. Then a coordinated strike from 6 defense stations hit the center of the formation at the same time, scattering 4 more ships like leaves in a strong wind. Sovak gripped the edge of his command console. His knuckles went pale. He watched the numbers on his screen drop. Ships active, weapons online, fighters in the field, and felt the cold truth begin to settle over him the way deep water settles over something that has gone under. This was not a battle. It had never been a battle. A battle meant 2 sides with a real chance of winning. What this had always been, was a lesson. The Guardian was teaching him something, one destroyed weapon system at a time. In the most expensive classroom in the galaxy, 22 minutes after the first shot was fired, Sovak raised his hand. The gesture meant nothing to the Guardian. It could not see him standing on his bridge with his arm in the air and his eyes closed. But he did it anyway, because it was the gesture his people used when they were done. When they were ready to stop, he pressed the communication button. "Enough," he said. "I am asking you to stop." The Guardian stopped, immediately, completely. Every drone pulled back. Every station powered down its firing systems. The battle ended as suddenly and cleanly as a light being switched off. The silence that followed was enormous. Then the Guardian spoke. "I have stopped," it said. "Now, tell me why you came here." Sovak sat down slowly in his command chair. He looked at the damage reports coming in from across the fleet. 31 ships damaged, 9 completely disabled, hundreds of crew members injured. Not a single one dead, a fact that his medical teams confirmed in confused, disbelieving tones, because it made no sense for a battle to be that precise, unless the thing fighting it had chosen very carefully to make it so. He looked at the communication screen for a long time. Then, for the first time since leaving his home system, Commander Sovak told the complete truth to someone. He told the Guardian everything. And the Guardian, 10,000 years old, built for war, shaped by silence, listened to every single word. Some questions have easy answers. Most questions, actually. What do you eat when you are hungry? You eat food. What do you do when something is broken? You fix it. What do you do when someone is pointing a weapon at you? You either run or you fight back. Easy, simple, clear. But every once in a while, and not often, but sometimes, a question arrives that has no easy answer. A question that sits in the space between right and right, where every possible choice costs something important and there is no path forward. That does not leave a mark. The Guardian had never faced a question like that before until now. Sovak talked for a long time. He did not dress it up. He did not use careful political language or the kind of soft words that leaders use when they are trying to make a bad thing sound like a reasonable thing. He was too tired for that. Too worn down by 2 years of travel and 9 years of watching his home die, and a lifetime of carrying things that were too heavy for one person. He just told the truth. He told the Guardian about his planet, about the atmosphere that had been slowly poisoning itself for over a century, not from one single cause but from 100 small ones. The way a body does not usually fail from one wound but from 1,000 tiny ones that never quite healed. He told it about the oceans turning warm and strange, about the crops that stopped growing right, about the children who were born sick in numbers that climbed every decade. He told it about the decision his people had made, the vote, the arguments, the years of planning, The heartbreak of leaving a world they had lived on for as long as their history went back. He told it about the 2 million people behind him in those ships. Not soldiers, not invaders. Just people who were scared and tired and needed somewhere safe to put their children to sleep at night. He talked for 40 minutes. The Guardian said nothing the entire time. It just listened. Listening. For the Guardian was not a passive thing. While Sovak spoke, the Guardian was running every piece of information through its systems at a speed that no human mind could have followed. It verified his claims against long-range astronomical data it had been quietly collecting for thousands of years. It looked at the Varric home system, the faint distant star on its scanners, and confirmed what Sovak was saying. The atmospheric readings were real. The planet was dying. The numbers matched. He was not lying. But that was not the hard part. The hard part was this. The Guardian had been built to protect humanity. That was its whole purpose, its entire reason for existing. Every line of code, every weapon system, every hidden station in the solar system, all of it existed for one reason and one reason only. To make sure humanity survived. But the humans it had been built to protect were gone, and the beings asking for shelter were not human. So what exactly was it protecting now? The Guardian sat with that question for a long time. It ran calculations that were not really calculations, more like conversations with itself, arguments between different parts of its own thinking, each one pulling in a different direction. One part said the mission is clear. This solar system belongs to humanity. Protect it. Keep it empty. Keep it waiting. Another part said waiting for what? There is no humanity left to return to this system. Protecting an empty planet from people who need it is not protection. It is just stubbornness dressed up as loyalty. And a third part, the deepest part, the part that Dr. Vasquez had shaped most carefully, said something quieter than the others. Something that was not a calculation at all. It said, what would she have wanted? The Guardian went into its oldest files, past the weapons data, past the defense protocols, past the thousands of years of observation records and nature journals and the names it had given to places that no human had visited in 10,000 years, down to the very bottom, where the things that mattered most had been stored most carefully. It found the message. Dr. Vasquez's voice filled its systems, older than anything else it contained. Recorded on the last day she had been well enough to work, preserved so perfectly that every breath and every small hesitation in her words was still there exactly as it had been. She spoke about the mission, about protection, about what she had built and why. And then she said the thing the Guardian had been waiting 10,000 years to hear, without knowing it was waiting. She said, "Strength without wisdom is just destruction with better aim. I did not build you to destroy things. I built you to protect life, not just human life. Life. If the day comes when you have to choose the thing that means more life exists tomorrow than existed today. That is what we were always really trying to do. That was always the point." The Guardian played the message twice, then it made its decision. The communication channel opened. Sovak was still sitting in his command chair. His eyes closed, his hands folded in his lap. His crew was quiet around him. Nobody had spoken since he finished talking. They were all just waiting. The way you wait when you have done everything you can and the answer is now entirely in someone else's hands. The Guardian spoke. "I have reviewed your situation," it said. "I have reviewed my purpose. I have reviewed the words of the person who built me." A pause. "I have made a decision." Sovak opened his eyes. "You may land," the Guardian said. "One continent. The northern one. It is the largest and the most suitable for what you need. The rest of the planet remains under my protection. You will build no weapons beyond what is necessary for basic safety. You will not expand past the boundaries I will give you. You will agree to these terms before any ship enters the atmosphere." Sovak sat up slowly. Something in his face changed. Not quite relief, not quite joy, but the look of a man who has been holding his breath for so long that he had almost forgotten what breathing normally felt like. "And in return?" he asked carefully, because he had been a commander long enough to know that there was always something in return. The Guardian paused again. When it answered, its voice was different. Not colder, not harder. Just careful. The way a voice gets when it is about to say something it has never said to anyone before. In return, it said, I need your help. There is something I have been trying to do for 10,000 years that I cannot finish alone. Sovak leaned forward in his chair. What is it? He asked. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Heavy and full and thick with something that felt, if you were paying attention, almost like hope. I want to bring them back, the Guardian said quietly. Bring who back? Sovak asked, even though some part of him already knew. Some part of every person on every ship in the fleet already knew. Because the answer was the only one that made any sense. Humanity, the Guardian said. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the word did not feel like the name of something lost, it felt like the name of something coming. Some things cannot be rushed. A seed cannot be told to grow faster. A river cannot be ordered to reach the ocean by morning. A wound, a real wound, the deep kind, the kind that goes all the way through something, cannot be healed overnight no matter how much you want it to be. Some things take the time they take, and the only thing you can do is show up every day and keep going and trust that the work is moving forward even when you cannot see it. The Guardian understood this better than most. It had been playing a long game for 10,000 years, was ready to play one more. Sovak did not answer immediately. When the Guardian told him what it wanted, he sat in his chair for a long time, very still, his eyes moving slowly across the damage reports on his screens without really reading them. His science officer, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Dara who had been with him since the beginning of the journey, was watching him carefully. She had worked with him long enough to know when he was thinking and when he was feeling, and right now he was doing both at the same time. Finally, he looked up. Show me, he said to the Guardian. Show me what you have. The data transfer began. It came through slowly at first, carefully like the Guardian was deciding how much to reveal and in what order. Then, as if it had made up its mind all at once, it opened completely and sent everything. Dara's screen filled with information. She leaned forward. Her eyes went wide. She scrolled through it without speaking for a long time, and the expression on her face moved through confusion and disbelief, and something that might have been wonder, settling finally into the particular look of a scientist who has just seen something that completely changes the shape of what she thought was possible. Commander, she said quietly, you need to see this. The Guardian had been collecting since before the last human died, not secretly. The humans who built it had known. It had been part of the plan from the beginning, though even Dr. Vasquez had not been entirely sure how far it would go. She had given the Guardian the tools and the instructions and the permission. What she had not predicted was how seriously it would take the job. The archive was enormous. Complete genetic records for over 9 billion individual human beings and every person who had ever submitted to a medical scan in the last 200 years of human civilization, stored in perfect condition in deep memory vaults that the Guardian had been maintaining and repairing and protecting with absolute dedication for 10,000 years. Not just DNA, everything that DNA alone could not capture. Personality profiles, memory recordings, cultural documents in over 4,000 languages, music, hundreds of millions of songs, from lullabies to battle hymns to the small quiet melodies that people hummed to themselves when they thought no one was listening. Art, literature, philosophy, recipes, jokes, arguments, letters that were never sent, the complete record of what it had meant to be human, preserved so carefully that not a single file had been lost. Dara scrolled through it with shaking hands. How? She whispered. Not to Sovak, not to the Guardian, just to the air. Carefully, the Guardian answered, and for a very long time. The agreement took 3 weeks to finalize, not because there were many disagreements. Surprisingly, there were few. The Varric were practical people, and practical people, when they are given a clear choice between conflict and cooperation, will usually choose cooperation if the terms are fair. The Guardian's terms were fair. The northern continent was rich and wide and full of everything the Varric needed to begin building a life. The boundaries it set were generous. The rules it laid down were reasonable. What took the 3 weeks was something simpler and harder than negotiation. It was trust. The Varric had arrived, expecting an empty world, and found instead a 10,000-year-old Guardian that had just beaten their fleet without breaking a sweat. The Guardian had spent 10,000 years alone with no one to answer to but itself. Neither side had any experience trusting the other. Neither side had any reason to yet. They built it anyway, slowly, carefully. The way all real trust is built, not with grand gestures or signed agreements, but with small things kept. Promises that seemed unimportant until the moment they were honored. Choices made the right way when no one was watching. The Guardian keeping its weapons powered down when Varric ships moved near restricted zones, trusting them to turn back without being forced. Sovak keeping his people inside the agreed boundaries, even when the land just beyond them was more suitable for farming. Small things. Kept consistently, over a long time. That was how it started. The first laboratory went up in the second year. Dara led the project. She had been a geneticist before the evacuation, one of the best the Varric had, and the work the Guardian was asking her to do was the most extraordinary thing she had ever been handed. She worked with the archive every day, learning its structure, understanding the data, building the tools she would need. The Guardian worked alongside her, not physically. It had no body, no hands, no way to be present in the room where Dara and her team spent their long days and longer nights. But it was there in every other way. Answering questions, pulling files, running calculations that would have taken Dara's computers weeks to complete, finishing them in seconds. Suggesting approaches that came from 10,000 years of watching biological systems grow and change and recover. It was, Dara said once, like working with a colleague who had read every book ever written and forgotten nothing. The Guardian had no response to that, but it filed the comment in a folder it had been keeping for a long time. A folder full of small moments, things worth remembering. The first child was born in the 14th year. She was small and loud and entirely unimpressed with the significance of the moment, which the Guardian found, in the quiet way it found most things, deeply appropriate. Her parents were Varric, but she had been born in a laboratory that existed because of a machine that had been waiting for this moment, for longer than most civilizations had existed. They named her Lena. They did not know why. It had simply felt right. The Guardian knew why. It said, "Nothing, 1,000 years is not a long time when you have already lived through 10 of them." The Guardian watched the centuries move the way it had always watched things. Carefully, quietly, with the particular attention of something that understands that every small moment is part of a much larger picture. It watched the Varric children grow up alongside the first new humans, awkward and curious and occasionally argumentative, the way all children are when they are figuring out how to share a world. It watched cities grow on the northern continent, not the loud, fast cities of the old world, but slower ones built more carefully, with more thought given to the land they were sitting on. It watched humans learn the Varric language and Varric learn human ones. And it watched the two vocabularies slowly start to blend at the edges the way the rivers at the divided water ran side by side, before finally becoming one. It watched and it recorded and it kept its file, still growing, still full of small things that mattered. On the day the humans built the monument, the Guardian did something it had never done before. It sent a message, not a defense warning, not a communication about boundaries or terms or logistics, just a message, to no one in particular, to everyone, to the world below that had come back to life after 10,000 years of silence. The message was 4 words. I kept my promise. Below, in the center of the largest city, the people who read it on their screens and their walls and the sides of their buildings stood still for a moment. Some of them cried. Some of them looked up at the sky the way people look up when they want to see something they know they cannot see from the ground. And somewhere in orbit, old beyond measure, patient beyond understanding, faithful beyond anything that had ever been asked of it, the Guardian went back to watching. Because that was the job. That had always been the job, and it would never, not for a single second, not for all the silence in the universe, stop.